Okay, the cemetery will help us to quickly get a hold on ourselves and focus on the tasks that lie ahead. It's not a pleasant thought, but that's the way things are. At the very least, we're pioneers, aren't we? Maybe we ought to distract ourselves to lighten up the mood. We can erect a number of buildings to increase confidence in our settlement, including, for example, a campfire or a pub. In this situation, however, our best option would probably be to upgrade our town center. Settlers can visit the new town center, and by doing so, increase their confidence for a while. Very good. The new town center not only gives us more storage space, at the same time, it functions just like a campfire, too. Settlers can visit the new town center, and by doing so, increase their confidence for a while. Now that we have made efforts to ensure the spiritual well-being of our settlers, we ought to attend to their physical health as well. Our settlers can get sick from time to time. Settlers who have become infected with a disease can die from it if they're not treated. Settlers will go to a medical facility to have themselves treated and will be admitted there, provided that beds are still available. We ought to ensure our settlers' medical health care. With this step, we have ensured the survival of the settlement for a while. Very good work. Since more and more children are being born these days, we should start to plan for the long term. While cabins are a good way to get settlers to start a family, they only provide limited space. This can quickly lead to people having to live on the street. Allow me to suggest to you that cabins be provided only in a very targeted manner in order to control the population growth of your settlement. Nothing is worse than not having enough resources to provide for everyone. We ought to build a shelter to be able to provide other inhabitants with a roof over their heads too. Very good. Remember that when children grow up, they're going to leave their parents' house and look around for a new place to live. It might happen that they don't find any home at all. We ought to build a shelter to be able to provide all inhabitants with a roof over their heads. I've already pointed out to you that it could become very dangerous if we were to run out of food at some point. Since a lot of people are going to be living in the new shelter, we ought to provide them with access to food in their vicinity. A hunting lodge can look for wildlife in the surrounding area to bring a little meat to the menu. perfect. The hunting lodge equally provides us directly with food, but it functions somewhat irregularly because it relies on wildlife in the surrounding area. Nevertheless, it can be indispensable during a drought because even the deer and wild boar still roam around the forest. However, wild animals can not only be shot, they can be captured too. When a wild animal has been captured, it can be brought to a pasture and served there as livestock. Animals captured by a hunter are brought to a pasture where they are tended to and cared for by herders. Some animals produce resources such as milk or eggs. Other animals will only be slaughtered to eat. You ought to find out for yourself which type of animal brings you which benefit. On each pasture, you can choose which type of animal ought to be kept there. You must provide water for the animals you keep on your pasture. This enables them to survive and reproduce. When enough animals are fully grown, the herder will start to slaughter them. If you don't want animals to be slaughtered, you can also instruct the herder not to do so. Now your herders know how they ought to handle the animals. And now that you've already captured several animals, don't forget to instruct your hunters to hunt animals again in the future so that they can continue to gather and provide food. With our increased production, our stockpile is going to run out soon. The supply routes for our production buildings are getting longer and longer too. To tackle these problems, you ought to build a temporary storeroom and have roads laid out. Good. Temporary storerooms increase your settlement's general storage capacity. Place them in a targeted manner in order to shorten the routes for goods between your production buildings. Roads are equally a great benefit because settlers moving on roads can go distinctly faster than on a normal supporting surface. To improve the whole thing even further, we can build a market to improve logistics at the settlement. Besides being an enormous stockpile for resources that is even able to store water, the market is responsible for distributing resources within your settlement. What's more, it also increases your settlers' confidence. vegeticians are able to amass resources from the whole settlement and bring them to the market. This improves the flow of your products and leads to your settlers having to walk shorter distances to fulfill their individual needs. The combination of these attributes makes the market the ideal building when you want to enlarge or even relocate your settlement. The larger your settlement gets, the farther some settlers have to travel to get to all of the food you produce. To make life a little easier for them, you can build a food station. Logisticians who work at the food station will collect food from your storage buildings and production facilities and bring it to the food station. With the new food station, your settlers are now able to supply themselves with food directly on site. If your settlement is supposed to grow even further, you can think about whether you want to provide additional food stations. Distributing food at your settlement is going to prove to be extremely practical. However, your settlers not only need food to survive, they need water too. To be able to distribute water in a targeted manner, you can build a water point. Now that your settlers also have a water point available, they can supply themselves with water and food. Similar to how it's done at the food stations, this enables you to precisely control at which places your settlers are able to attend to their needs. Since we have our logistics under control, now we can concern ourselves with the weather and its challenges. We can build a weather station to enable us to make a forecast regarding upcoming weather and learn if potentially contaminated rain might be coming our way. It can also be used to prepare our crops and rainwater collectors we might have against contaminated rain by covering them. Very good. Now that we know what sort of weather awaits us and how we can protect ourselves against contaminated rain by covering our crops and rainwater collectors, we ought to attend to collecting the rain we want. Rain not only humidifies the soil, it can also be automatically collected via rainwater collectors to generate a steady flow of additional water. Since we've already built our weather station, we're able to decide what kind of circumstances would make us want to cover our rain collectors. Never forget that our settlers might get sick if we distribute water contaminated with radiation at our settlement, even if they're wearing protective clothing. We should make sure that the collected water is as purified as possible. We can have our crops covered to shield our seedlings against radiation. But once they've been covered, naturally they won't be irrigated with rain anymore. To rectify this problem, we can build an irrigation plant that is able to artificially regulate soil humidification. fabulous. As long as our irrigation plant is supplied with filtered water, it is able to neutralize a possible contamination of the soil due to radiation. But watch out. When water contaminated with radiation is fed into the system, this can lead to precisely the opposite. And the irrigation plant itself may possibly cause radioactive pollution of its surrounding area. Alongside contaminated rain, there are other environmental hazards, such as sandstorms or droughts. The soil dries out during a drought, and sandstorms sweep across the landscape from time to time. These sandstorms can damage your buildings and ultimately make them unfit for use. We ought to prepare for this and assign several more builders to enable potential damage to be repaired. You can decide which type of task your builders ought to give priority to at our town center. You can instruct them to merely repair buildings, to erect new buildings, or to do both at the same time. This enables you to react quickly in crisis situations. For instance, in the event of a sandstorm, you can quickly attend to having damaged buildings repaired. Now that we've taken care of all the necessary needs of our settlement, such as food, water, protective clothing, and tools, our next efforts ought to focus on increasing the settlement's overall productivity. A research station allows us to develop different technologies. One step in moving our settlement ahead is to make it possible for our refiners to acquire electronics from scrap. We should perform research on the appropriate technology to achieve this and instruct one of our refiners to produce electronics.